Hello, YouTube. This is Al once again for Kindred Souls of Brooklyn, your place for everything Brooklyn. I'd like to thank you once again for hitting that play button. And tonight I have a really special story for you. Absolutely true story. You could look it up if you like in the history books, but I'll give my own private history of it. One of the most fascinating, exciting days of my life. Well, as you might guess and know by now by watching some of my videos, I am a Mets fan. So on July 13th, 1977, my parents and I decided to go see a Mets game out at Shea Stadium. The new stadium is called Citi Field, but back in the day it was called Shea Stadium, which closed in 2008. So, as usual, we left the house here. The game was a 7:05 game, I believe it was, and so we left here about 5:15. My dad worked in Manhattan, and what we would do is we'd pick him up by 6 o'clock over on Nassau Street, which is where he worked, and we'd pick him up there, and we drive over to Queens. If you don't come from this area, basically we're from Brooklyn, so we're driving about 5 or 6 miles into Manhattan, and then we're picking my dad up, and then we're driving another like 5 to 7 miles out to Flushing, Queens, which is where the Mets play. So the night started out. We had done that many times, so we picked them up and we showed up at Shea Stadium about 6:30, quarter to seven, in time for the end of batting practice, and of course the national anthem, which is one of our favorite things to take part and to listen to and sing along to. And that particular night, like I always did every single year, I bought myself a nice trusty yearbook. Now this is the 1977 Mets yearbook with you Yankee fans out there. This is Joe Torre. Before he was a Yankee manager, he was a Mets player and also a Mets manager. In fact, he was actually the last, I believe, player manager. So this is the 1977 Met yearbook with Joe Torre on it in a Mets uniform. Of course, Joe Torre made his living as a St. Louis Cardinal. A little baseball history there. So anyway, the game starts. It's a wonderful game, of course, and so watching the game play, I got my usual hot dog and fries, and at the time they had RC Cola over at Shea Stadium. So sitting there, the Mets were a last place team in those years, but we didn't care because the Mets had won the World Series in 1969. They had gotten to the World Series in 1973 against the Oakland A's, and they had gotten to the seventh game and lost. So it didn't really matter to us. We were always big baseball fans. We still had that fever pitch going from '73, so we didn't care. So here we are. We go and we sit. Wasn't hard to get tickets. Wasn't a big crowd. So it's a hot night. It's July 13th. There was a heat wave going on all throughout New York City. So Lenny Randall, who was probably his best year was 1977 with the Mets. He actually comes up to bat, hits a ball, and all of a sudden hits the ball to second base. The lights go completely out. Not a light in the place except for the emergency lighting. Well, nobody thinks anything of it. The Mets in the back in the day had a lady who used to play the piano. Her name was Jane Jarvis, and she used to play. They still got some of those things at stadiums today, but not as prevalent. But she was fantastic. She was there for years. So she was playing the piano, or it's like a pipe organ, and she was playing that, and the lights were all out in Shea Stadium. The only thing on was above each doorway of Shea Stadium. There was like one light bulb, an emergency light. So you had maybe about, I don't know, 30 or 40 doorways in the whole stadium, and that was it for the lights. And no one really thought much of it. We figured there was a power outage, in the stadium. And then all of a sudden, some guy turned around and said, "Hey, look, all the lights are out all across New York City. Look, the train is stopped over there." There was a 7 train literally stopped dead in its tracks. Um, Amazing. So people started to get a little nervous. I mean, me, I was 12 years old. What was I really to have to be nervous about? Um, so then we waited about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden an announcement comes over the emergency speaker, and it says, "New York City has experienced a major blackout. The game will have to be canceled. You could resume it on another day to be announced." So, okay, fine. So we leave. But then, who's ever been in such a situation? We go outside. There's literally nothing. It's pitch black. The only lights we could see were the headlights of the cars. That was all you had. So we made our way back to the parking lot in Shea Stadium, which was a really big parking lot. But again, like I told you, the Metro in last place, so it wasn't a huge crowd out there. So we made our way back to the car. We started up the car. Of course, the car battery worked in the car. We were able to listen to the radio. I guess radio stations back in the day, probably today too, had emergency generators, and they were working. All the radio stations, pretty much that we knew of, were working. So here we were driving back to Brooklyn from Queens, from Flushing, um, in the car. So we get back on the highway going toward Brooklyn, and of course, again, it's pitch black. Only headlights are going on. We're still talking about it. We can't believe what's going on. What's going to happen? Now you got to remember, there's no cell phones either back in the day. So you have no cell phones. Nothing's going on, and we're driving along, and I guess in the conversation or whatever, my mom was always a great driver. My dad would work like these long days, so when we would go for a ride, usually he wouldn't drive. He'd sit in the back reading the newspaper. Also for me, I loved playing the radio, so he would sit in the back read the newspaper, whatever. But he wasn't doing it this night. We were just having that conversation about the blackout and what was going to happen. So I guess my mom wasn't paying complete, total concentration between the blackness or the conversation or whatever, and she actually drove over the Williamsburg Bridge, which was not the correct way for us to go home. So I just distinctly remember my father, who was always a really calm guy, all of a sudden like kind of lose it. What the heck are you doing? Going over the Williamsburg Bridge? Where are you going? What are you doing? And, and my mother, of course, yelling back and saying, "Shut up! You know, what do you think this is? A kiddie car? I'm driving here. Just be quiet. We're going over Manhattan. What's the difference?" So here's where the amazing part kind of comes in, is that, of course, we go over it and we get to Manhattan, and we start driving back. Well, we get to Manhattan. Okay, how are we going to get back to Brooklyn? We got to take the Brooklyn Bridge. So that means where we are, where the Williamsburg Bridge lets out, essentially we got to drive across Broadway. Now, I had never seen, of course, anything like this, but we started driving along Broadway. Now, when the lights went out, there was mass looting across New York City. Um, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, all the lights were out. So I distinctly remember we're driving along Broadway. Now, of course, there was also, the city was short of money. So I believe they had given a notice to 5,000 police officers, had laid them off. And the police force was shorthanded. So we were driving along Broadway, and I never saw anything like it. There were guys literally walking with television sets, radios. Now you got to remember, this is 1977. These things were big. They weren't like things are today, digital and all that stuff. They were walking, going, wheeling refrigerators, boom boxes, stereos. I'd never seen anything like it. So my parents are like, lock the doors, keep the windows rolled up. Now, of course, we did anyway. It's like 96 degrees, July 13th, middle of a hot dog day afternoon summer in New York City. But unbelievable. I mean, we just couldn't believe what we were seeing. So, of course, we make it to the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, there's no lights, but, plenty of cars in New York City. Um, so we drive over the bridge and we come through Brooklyn, and to be honest, I really didn't see it. It was definitely going on because there was reports of it, but the way we drove back, we didn't notice any looting going on in Brooklyn. We drove back to our neighborhood, which is, a calm neighborhood, which I've done videos before. You guys have seen some of it. Even back then, it was very calm. So drove back to our neighborhood. There was really nothing going on over here. Where we are, there was only like 65 stores up on our main strip, and they were mostly mom and pop stores, but I guess that really didn't matter in the city because they were looting everything. But we came back here, and my sister was a nervous wreck. We came up and she had like candles lit in her bedroom, which was toward the outside window, and she was pacing back and forth like there was no tomorrow. So we pulled up and we parked the car right in front of the house, and our dog must have gotten back. It must have been like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and the dog, my sister was, she had given the dog lots of water, and the dog that we had, as much water as you gave him, he would drink. So By the time we showed up at 10:30, quarter 11, his back teeth were floating. So I remember going in and him greeting us, and he actually ran out of the gate, and there was a pole right outside our house for alternate side parking. And for the first time ever in my life with this, he lifted his leg on the pole, and he must have drank so much water he was bursting that he actually was the first time I've ever seen a dog do this in my life. He actually had his leg lifted. He actually, after peeing for I don't know how long, actually put his leg down, turned around, and lifted his other leg up on the pole and continued. I never seen anything like it. So the rest of the night, of course, continued on with regaling tales of what we saw at the stadium, the looting, all that. Of course, when we came back, all the power is off. My parents were nervous over the food in the refrigerator. So, like, we were thinking, okay, what are we going to eat first? Nobody knew how long the power was going to be off for. So they were making provisions. We took the ice out of the refrigerator, freezer rather. We had a couple of coolers. We didn't have a lot of ice, but we put in what we thought, like the milk and stuff like that. We just assumed, okay, we had a barbecue. So here we were planning out, okay, I guess we're going to be having barbecues for any untold time. But lo and behold, we went to sleep that night. And then the next day, July 14th, I can't remember the exact time, but I remember we had a light, in the hallway, which is actually still there, of course. And I remember walking out, must have been about 11, 12 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, the light went on and the power was back on across New York City. But it was one heck of a time. And so, again, have this magnificent commemoration of the night, the New York Mets yearbook, and like I said, Lenny Randall, who was up for the Mets, who hit that ground ball, got credited with a base hit. He was standing on second base, and I actually went and we had gone to a couple games this year. I don't know if you could see it. I got some autographs on here, but that's Lenny Randall's autograph right there on the bottom. Let me see if I can turn it around for you a little bit. Anyway, that's Lenny Randall's autograph. Pat Zachary, Felix Mion, and Bobby Valentine as well. His is on there too. So every time I look at that yearbook, it's a magnificent memory of that night. Like I said, my parents were kind of nervous, but as a 12-year-old kid, I just thought it was amazing and exciting. So that's my New York City blackout story. Always remember where I was because Shea Stadium and driving through Manhattan. So another magnificent Brooklyn story. Had to tell that one to you. So hope everyone's having a fantastic night. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please subscribe. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate all the support. And have a great night. And I'll see you real soon. Thank you.